In part 2 of our lecture on war and violence in world politics, we will examine recent trends pointing to a decline in interstate war. In particular, we'll look at the absence of a great power war and then discuss and analyze this from the realist, liberal, and constructivist perspectives. What explains war? Let's examine it through the lens of the paradigms we looked at earlier in the course. According to realists, war is part of human nature. Structural realists think that war is inevitable because of the anarchy that makes up world politics. Liberals think that war is caused by the domestic regime types. That is, that a country led by an aggressive leader like Hitler will go to war. Marxists and neo-Marxists believe that war is inevitable because of international capitalism. Constructivists think that global norms make war inevitable. And finally, feminists think that it's inevitable because men are prone to use violence. Statistically, there has been a decline in interstate war, that is, war between two countries. In 1991, 30% of the world was involved in war. By 2005, this had been reduced to 15%. One reason for the decline in war is that major powers don't go to war with other major powers. When a major power like the United States goes to war, it's usually a war against a smaller, less capable country, or they fight proxy wars such as Korea and Vietnam, where America fought against forces that were supplied and supported by China and Russia. Another reason is that a number of countries no longer threaten to fear war with one another and coexist in a security community. This relationship exists between the United States, Japan, Canada, and Western Europe. Realists explain the decline in interstate war within the parameters of their paradigm. War has become less frequent because power is more evenly distributed. The balance of power serves as a deterrent. Nuclear deterrence is another reason. The concept of mutual assured destruction, MAD, and the inability of preventing a retaliatory strike has created more stability based on the need to survive. The Cold War was the longest period of peace between the great powers in modern history. The period of peace has to be qualified as a lack of a major war. During the Cold War, there were at least 3 conventional wars in Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan. Clausewitz, the foremost military theorist of the 19th century, wrote that war is the continuation of policy. It was thought by some that nuclear weapons made this idea obsolete. Apparently not so. Why would countries go to war at the risk of a nuclear war? This is explained by the stability-instability complex in which many states assume that conventional war will never escalate into a nuclear war between the superpowers. SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, first proposed as a national strategy by President Ronald Reagan, has the potential to change the idea of nuclear utilization. Successful implementation of SDI would make the idea of MAD obsolete. The debate is whether this would make the world more or less stable. Realists do not think that the long peace is likely to continue because it is based on U.S. hegemony, which even today is threatened by the transition of power and the reluctance of the American public to pay the bill required to maintain military superiority and deterrence. Liberals explain the lack of interstate war to 3 factors. One is that most countries now belong to the United Nations, which promotes the settlement of disputes through peaceful means. Another reason is that democracies do not typically go to war with each other. Finally, liberals believe that countries that depend on each other for trade do not make war on each other. The critical element in the idea that democracies do not go to war with each other is whether countries are truly democratic. A democracy has 3 essential elements. The majority of the population participates in the political process, governments can be changed through fair and free elections, and civil liberties are guaranteed. The trend in the countries of the former Soviet Union, notably Russia, is to fall back into an authoritarian form of government. Here, the wave of democratization has been rolled back. The trend displayed in this chart is optimistic and out of date. Since 2006, the Freedom Index has declined. In 2016, the number of countries showing a decline in freedom for the year 72 was the largest since the 10-year slide began. just 43 countries have made gains. Over the past 10 years, 105 countries have seen a net decline, and only 61 have experienced a net improvement. Ratings for the Middle East and North Africa region were the worst in the world in 2015, followed closely by Eurasia. Over the last decade, the most significant global reversals have been in freedom of expression and rule of law. Realists believe that peace is possible through the distribution of power, and liberals think that spreading democracy promotes peace. Constructivists hold that peace can be attained by changing global norms. Two opposing global norms are pacifism and the just war doctrine. Pacifism is the position that any use of violence to kill or do physical harm to other human beings is morally unacceptable. It is an absolutist position that offers few or no exceptions. No good cause or vital interest can justify the killing of a human being. Pacifism is rejected because it denies the right to self-defense, and it denies the right to use violence to defend other innocent lives. Just war accepts that war can be both necessary and just. It is different from realism in that ethical and moral considerations must be part of determining when and how wars are fought. Jus ad bellum, justice of war, explains the circumstances when it is morally acceptable to go to war. Jus in bello, justice in war, lists the two criteria of how war should be conducted. One is discrimination. Those conducting and fighting a war must take all reasonable efforts to discriminate between soldiers and civilians and to attempt to limit harm to civilians. Proportionality. The degree of violence used must be proportional to the just cause pursued. For example, using nuclear weapons on Baghdad in 1991 to force Iraq out of Kuwait would have been a disproportionate response. Trends in technology and human nature paint a mixed picture of the future of war. On one hand, smart weapons have made it possible to avoid collateral damage to civilians. On the other, weapons that would destroy the power grid in industrialized nations might destroy the fabric of society. Terrorism by religious and ideological extremist groups make possible the use of torture and brutality and weapons of mass destruction in ways that are prohibited to legitimate governments. While statistics may indicate that war has become less frequent, we live in a much more dangerous world.